All right, welcome back to another episode, ladies and gentlemen. Today, nestled along the majestic Ottawa River, two cities offer two worlds. And on one side, the bustling streets of Canada's capital in Ottawa, and on the other side, the charming allure of Gatineau, Quebec. But what happens when you're torn between these two distinct choices for your next move? So for future homeowners, relocators, downsizers, job seekers, and even students. Now, choosing between Ottawa and Gatineau isn't just about pinning a location on the map, it's about diving deep into the heart of what makes each city unique. Today, we're going to be discussing the cost of living between Ottawa and Gatineau, language differences, obviously, healthcare services, taxes, childcare costs, and culture. So if you're ready to dive into the heart of these two fascinating cities, grab a snack, make a coffee, let's go. All right, welcome back everybody. My name is Mark Belanger and I help families relocate to the Ottawa real estate market via relocation, which is what we're talking about in this video today, and or get out of the Ottawa real estate market via downsizing and other services. So if either of these are of interest to you, please just go to my website, markbelangerrealty.com. You'll see a link to my schedule, book a call with me, schedule an hour, and let's go check out some neighborhoods and let's see if this is something that you want to do. Now, for this video, before we dissect Gatineau versus Ottawa, I think we should step back a little bit and really determine if we can afford to live in the Ottawa area. That's question number one. And to give you a bit of context on that, let's step back even further. On the first half of 2023, we immigrated approximately 250,000 people. Now, we don't have the stats just yet because at time of recording, this is early 2024. We don't have the stats on the second half of 2023. But let's just assume that we continued that pace and we immigrated approximately 500,000 people here in Canada in 2023. That's a lot, but the bulk of the 500,000 people made Ontario home, just about half the population, which has been the trend for the last few years. So let's just assume roughly about 250,000 people. Now, the bulk of those reside in the GTA area or in Southern Ontario. So Ottawa historically has only captured about 10% of that population. So let's just say 10% of 250,000, somewhere plus or minus between 20 and 25,000 people immigrating to Ottawa in 2023. Now, these people have the same questions. They got to decide whether they're going to move to Ottawa and or Gatineau. So let's dive into that today and let's take out the trusty tool that I've already talked about in a video in the past, which I'll link in the description below and at the end, which is Numbeo. Let's first tackle the cost of living between Ottawa and Gatineau before we dissect the other components in this video. So let's check it out. I'll show you my screen. Let's dive into it right now. We are back on the trusted numbeo.com website. As I said off the top, I've made a video on this, which I'll link in the description as well, that talks about this tool. But as you can see at the very top, Numbeo is, first of all, the largest real-time database where people go out and they price things and they upload it in real time to Numbeo. And those things are transportation costs, rental costs, food costs, and so on. And it is really designed to compare one city over another city. So if you're contemplating moving from anywhere to anywhere else, check out Numbeo. It's a good data point as you start your research. And as you can see on my screen here, I am comparing Gatineau, Quebec versus Ottawa. And immediately the introduction here will tell you that the consumer prices in Ottawa are 9.6% higher than in Gatineau. You do the consumer prices including rent, it is now a staggering 22.4% higher in Ottawa than in Gatineau. Break that down even further. Rental costs in Ottawa is a mind-blowing 64% higher in Ottawa than in Gatineau. So some real significant savings if you want to potentially move over to the Gatineau side. Restaurant prices in Ottawa are 16% higher, groceries are 7.2% higher, and your local purchasing power is 7% lower in Ottawa than in Gatineau. So furthermore, at the very top, you get cost of living, you get property prices, you get quality of life. I'll let you guys sort of mess around with the tool itself, but it has a crime index, it has pollution, it talks about healthcare and things like that. So again, from a research perspective, check it out. Okay, so just to summarize, we'll go through this very quickly. All restaurant costs are more expensive in Ottawa than they are in Gatineau. That is no surprise to me. Ottawa is just a larger city. It is just more competitive. The market will dictate pricing at this point. And if they can afford to be more expensive and if people are buying it, then of course that's what's going to happen. So restaurants are more expensive in Ottawa. Now, groceries, now this as a subcategory, a lot of green and a lot of red. Just at a glance, I'm just gonna say this is a wash. I think groceries are the same one side to the others. There's a couple of outliers in here, like potatoes apparently are almost double the price in Ontario. I'm not sure why. I'm not a farmer, I have no idea. I might be a potato, I just don't know about potatoes. But a couple of outliers, but for the most part, they are pretty much a wash. We'll scroll down. Transportation cost in Ottawa is less expensive on a single fare perspective, but less expensive in Gatineau if you're a savvy investor and you buy the monthly pass, which obviously I would encourage you to do. So buy the monthly pass and you're saving some cash in Gatineau. So scroll through that. Utility costs in Gatineau. Now we're starting to save a bit of cash. You're saving approximately $100 over Ottawa. And this is everything from electricity to heating to cooling and so on. So said another way, Ottawa is 65% more expensive than in Gatineau from a utilities perspective. So pretty substantial. All right, so we're getting into, we'll save childcare for another topic. Let's get into clothing and shoes. More expensive, kind of like the restaurants in Ottawa. Everything's more expensive in Ottawa. And here is the mind-blowing statistics from a cost perspective. We're talking about rent. It's the same thing on a purchase perspective. So if you're purchasing between the two, you're going to see a huge delta in the savings in Gatineau versus Ottawa. So in this case, let's compare a 1-bedroom rental and a 3-bedroom rental. A 1-bedroom rental in Ottawa, it's going to cost you almost $2,000, whereas in Gatineau, it's $1,350 on average. So a 47% increase when you cross the river into Ottawa. A 3-bedroom in the city center downtown, this is no surprise to me, almost $3,300 and an increase of a staggering 70% versus a 3-bedroom in the downtown core in Gatineau. So no matter how you slice and dice it, if you're looking at the cost and only the cost in terms of making this decision between Ottawa and Gatineau, you have to give Gatineau the win on this particular criteria. So 1 for Gatineau, 0 for Ottawa as we march through this comparison. So I hope you found this valuable. I certainly did. Everybody here in Ottawa, I think intuitively knows that rental specifically is far less expensive on the Gatineau side, or even housing costs for that matter on the Gatineau side. So win number 1, Gatineau. All right, the second category that we're gonna look at is language. So contemplating moving between the two, we gotta figure out the language where you're comfortable in living. In Ottawa, according to the last census, 14% of the population identify as French speaking. Said another way, 40% of the population identify as being bilingual, French and or English as their first language. So up to 40% of the population is comfortable speaking French, writing in French, and having conversations in French. The bulk of the population on the other side, the 60%, are going to say English as a first language or whichever country that they're coming from, potentially if they're immigrating to Canada. Between 14 and 40% of the population are French speaking. So if you are 100% French, you have no issue in Ottawa as it is a bilingual city. If you're English and English only, then I obviously think that you will feel more comfortable in Ottawa, because on the Gatineau side, it is predominantly French and French only. Everywhere you go, whether you're doing groceries, you're shopping, you're out at restaurants and whatnot, the French culture is prevalent And that is what you're going to hear on a day-to-day basis. So you have to contemplate if you are comfortable speaking in French. Do you have the capacity to learn French or learn another language? Do you have kids? And if you do have kids, you want to put them in the French system in Quebec. All things that you've got to consider between the two. But just based out of convenience, I have to give this particular category over to Ottawa because French and or English, you'll feel comfortable in the Ottawa side, whereas in Gatineau, it really is catering to French and French culture. So win on this side for Ottawa. All right, the next category that we have to tackle is, of course, taxes. Everyone's favorite category. Let's dive into that. But first, let's just explain that in Canada, for those that don't know, we operate a progressive tax system. And what that simply means is the more money you earn, the more you're going to be paying in taxes as you climb the earnings ladder. So the first $50,000, you're going to pay X amount in taxes. And then the next $50,000, you're going to pay a higher percentage in taxes for that $50,000. So I hope that makes sense. And then when we compare Ottawa to Gatineau, we're also going to be comparing federal taxes to provincial taxes. So first of all, at the federal level, good news, there is no difference. Everybody pays the same, and that is 15% on the first 50,000 or so, 15%. On the next $50,000, we're going to be paying 20.5%. So 15% plus 20.5% for a total of $100,000, a total of $17,740 plus or minus a little bit. So $17,000 in federal income tax. Now, when we break that down to the provincial side, you'll see that there is an advantage, clear advantage on the Ottawa or on the Ontario side. So the first $46,000 in Ontario, you're getting taxed at a 5.05% clip. On the next $46,000, you're getting taxed at a 9.15% clip. So you add the two together, you're paying $2,300 plus $4,900. You're paying roughly $7,250 in provincial taxes in Ontario. Again, $7,250. Now on the Quebec side, you're paying 15% on the first $46,000. 15%, not 5. And you're adding an additional 20% on the next $46,000. So again, from 9% to 20%. So you add the two together, you're paying roughly $17,685 on the Quebec side for their provincial taxes versus what I had just said on the Ontario side, which I'm pulling up here, is $7,250. So a clear $10,000 delta savings on the Ontario side. So for that reason and that reason alone, we gotta score the advantage here in Ottawa. But a huge capital note here, asterisk, everything else, you're paying more taxes in Quebec, but as you're going to see later in the video, you're offsetting some of those costs because healthcare and other services are subsidized, daycare is subsidized and stuff like that. So you got to pay for that kind of stuff, and that is being reflective here in the taxes. So tax advantage, Ottawa, for this particular exercise. All right, the next category that we have to talk about is daycare cost or child care cost as we compare both Ottawa and Gatineau. This is a significant one. So if you have younger children, this will definitely apply to you. For those that are older like me and we've passed through this phase, then obviously this is not, we're not gonna have to worry about it. But let's break it down. In Quebec, we have to actually have a distinction between subsidized daycare cost and privatized daycare costs. So let's break both of those down. If you are lucky enough to get into subsidized daycare services in Quebec, first of all, it is super competitive to get in there. Everybody wants to get subsidized daycare, of course, because the average cost is $8.70 per day per child. So when you annualize that and you multiply that by 260 working days in a calendar year, let's say, then you're looking at a cost of $2,200, $2,300, call it $2,500 for all intents and purposes. $2,500 for subsidized daycare cost in Quebec. In Ontario, on the flip side, the monthly fee for daycare is somewhere between $1,200 and $1,800. So again, let's take the average, $1,500 multiply 1,500 times 12 months in the calendar year, you're at $18,000. So $18,000 in Ottawa or 2,500 bucks in Gatineau. So clearly the advantage on the Gatineau side. Now, if you're not as lucky and you don't get into subsidized daycare, but you get privatized daycare, you're still looking at $40 to $60 per day. Then you annualize that times 260 working days, you're still looking at approximately $13,000 per year, which is still less than $18,000 on average on the Ottawa side. So no matter how you slice and dice this, the Gatineau child daycare system is more financially advantageous than the Ottawa side. So for that reason only, if that's the measure you're looking for, you got to score this one for Gatineau. All right, our next category that we're going to talk about is healthcare. Now, this one is complicated because there's a lot of overlapping that we got to consider. Primarily, what pays for the healthcare when you compare both Ottawa and Gatineau, and that is reflective on the taxes, which we had already just talked about, which Gatineau is paying a significant more amount for provincial tax, which will be covered via healthcare. So let's just go through it. On the Quebec side, you are covered under the RAMQ system, whereas on the Ontario side, you are covered under the OHIP program, which is the Ontario Health Insurance Plan. That's just the two differences from a healthcare perspective. What is covered on one side, you're pretty much getting both on the other side. Maybe arguably a little bit more coverage on the Ontario side. You get the doctor's care, obviously you get the hospital care, you get hospital stays, which you don't get, like the cost of the staying in the hospitals is covered on the Ontario side, not on the Quebec side. And there are just more numerous professional services that are offered under the OHIP program. Aside from that, arguably, you would say that there are longer wait times for specialized care on the Quebec side, so that is definitely a positive on the Ontario side. And then, of course, you have to talk about the French language as well. So if you're English speaking and you're rushing to the hospital and they're speaking in French to you, it's going to cause just a little bit of stress. So just know that for the most part, not always, but for the most part, there's French speaking at the hospitals or for the healthcare in Quebec, whereas on the Ontario side, you're going to have the flexibility. You're going to have French and or English in that scenario. So all else being equal for me, now this is a matter of personal choice. I am sticking to the Ottawa side because I don't want to be paying for the taxes on the provincial side, and I get better wait times, I get more flexibility for language, more services, arguably more services on the Ontario side. So for that reason, I am giving this one to Ottawa. All right, moving along, our last category is the culture category, and this one again is pretty simple for me. I believe from a culture perspective, what you're seeing in Quebec is French culture. There's no doubt about it. You'll immerse yourself into the French culture. That is good. But on the Ottawa side, you're not only going to get the English and French culture, but you're just going to get a lot more choice as it comes down to more museums, more arts, more restaurants, more festivals, more events, more sports, all of that on the Ontario side for sure versus the Gatineau side. So from a culture perspective, I don't think there's any debate on this one. Ottawa wins the culture side on this particular category. All right, so I'm gonna wrap up the video here. I hope you enjoyed it. As you can see in this video, all of this comes down to personal choice and personal circumstances. So it's not one size fits all, and there's not one set cookie cutter answers. I scored it 4-2 on the Ottawa side, but again, my kids are older, I'm French speaking, I'm comfortable here, I have a doctor. Everything for me scores or checks out well here in Ottawa, but I can see a scenario for younger families that want to save money from a rental perspective. They do have some advantages on the Quebec side. So whatever your circumstance is, if you want to reach out to me and you want to discuss homes and or rentals here in Ottawa, reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you out. If you are looking more on the Gatineau side, then obviously reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with somebody in Gatineau who is reputable and who can help you through your journey. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you like it. If you think I've earned it, please consider giving me a thumbs up. You know that this helps my YouTube algorithm and it helps get this message out to more people. So I would really appreciate it. I hope you liked it. And until the next video, take care.